Hare Krishna. Again, we'd like to welcome you to our evening Katha. We hope you're all safe and sound and increasing your sadhana and your hearing and chanting. Of course, you all come every day at this time to hear. Today we're going to hear about the glories of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. So, since we'll be talking about the pure devotee of the Lord, we have a beautiful song glorifying the Vaishnava Sannyasi. I think everybody knows this song, E Bara Karuna Koro, because it's only by the mercy of the pure devotee of the Lord that we can enter into bhakti. Even Krishna himself doesn't give bhakti. As I translated Madhurya Kadambini by Srila Viswanath Chakravarti Thakur, he explains that only the bhakt, only the Vaishnava can give you bhakti, because bhakti lives in the heart of the bhakt. So this is a very beautiful song. E bara karuna koro Vaishnava Gosai. E bara karuna koro Vaishnava Gosai. Patita pavana toma bina kehona. Patita pavana toma bine kehona. Jaharane kate gele papa dure jai. Kaharani kate gele papa dure jai. E manadayala Prabhu ke bhakota pai. E manadayala Prabhu ke bhakota pai. Gangara parasha hoile paschate pavan. Gangara parasha hoile paschate pavan. Darshane pavitra koro eto maragu. Darshane pavitra koro eto maragu. Haristane aparadhe tare harinam. Haristane aparadhe tare harinam. Tomastane aparade nahi paritra. Tomastane aparade nahi paritra. Tomar hridoye sada Govinda Vishram. Tomar hridoye sada Govinda Vishram. Govinda kahe namora Vaishnava para. Govinda kahe namora Vaishnava para. Prati janme kori asham charaneraduli. Prati janme kori asham charaneraduli. Naruttama koro daya panaraboli. Koro daya panaraboli. Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, 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 Jai Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya 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 Vaishnava Thakur. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So again, we welcome you all to our evening Katha, and we hope that all of you are safe and increasing your bhajan. First, I have to apologize. My knees won't allow me to sit on the floor. It's very improper to sit on a higher seat or same level as a spiritual master. I told last time the story in LA airport. Everybody was sitting. Prabhupada was waiting for the plane, sitting on the chair. So I sat in the chair opposite, on the opposite side of the road. It was a quite wide aisle. But Prabhupada immediately went like this. Then they understood one should never sit on same level or higher than the spiritual master. So I begged forgiveness from Prabhupada. I begged forgiveness from all of you. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desitarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhuveva Patidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we just sang one of my favorite songs glorifying the Vaishnava. So here it says, Gangara Parasha Hoile Paschate Pavan. That by taking bath in the Ganga, after some time, one becomes, Pachati means after some time, Pavan, one becomes pure. Darshani Pavitro Eto Maragun. Nartam is addressing the Vaishnava. He says, Darshani Pavitro, just by darshan, seeing a Vaishnava, darshan matra se, you become pure. And we had the practical proof of this one time. In the old days, before there was all this terrorism and everything, we used to go right inside the airport with all the huge kirtan party. Of course, in LA, then all the devotees from the whole West Coast would come. So we would have like 300, 350 devotees, 5 mridangas, 25 kartals. We'd go right into LAX with the kirtan. Nowadays, we can't even dream of such a thing. We used to go right up to the gate. So big kirtan was going on. Hare Krishna, Krishna. Devotees were jumping and dancing. So everybody came to see what was going on. But nobody could see anything because the devotees were jumping and jumping. So one other person came to see. Nowadays, to make them feel good, we call them sanitation engineer. Means the floor mopper. Now you can understand, to be floor mopper, you don't need a university degree. So he is a very simple type of fellow. And he was so black, he made the nighttime look like daytime. It's a very simple fellow. So he also came, and he was leaning on his mop, but he couldn't see anything. Suddenly Prabhupada came out, and all the devotees hit the ground. And everybody saw. Now some of you who aren't from America, you may think you know English very well, but you won't understand this type of language. He took one look, that floor mopper took one look at Prabhupada, and he said, "Look, that man, he's shining, he's shining. Look, that man, he's shining, he's shining, he's shining. Look, that man, he's shining." He said, "Look at that man, he's shining, he's shining. Look at that man, he's shining." Simple little guy, but just by seeing the Vaishnava, he became so purified, he could see the light was emanating from Srila Prabhupada's body. So this is the proof of this slok. Darshani Pavitra Koro Eto Mara Gun. So since we're in Los Angeles, we'll tell another story about Los Angeles. Because I was sent to LA to get trained up, because at that time Prabhupada wanted some of the big centers to be the training, especially LA. And so I was sent from Boulder, Colorado, to go to LA and get trained up. And I met one devotee. I haven't met him ever since. A simple little guy named Mahaprabhu Das, who was all the way back from 26 2nd Avenue. He told me a very touching story about Srila Prabhupada, since he's no longer around anywhere. You'll never see this on the memory series. But he used to stop by 26 2nd Avenue and join the kirtan, and everybody knew that noontime you could go upstairs to the apartment behind 26 2nd Avenue on the first floor up, and you could get free lunch. So sometimes he used to stop in to get free lunch. And they would all sit. Prabhupada would be sitting there on the floor. They'd all be sitting on the floor. And there was dal and something called sabji and this flat breads called chapatis and rice and all these things. And Prabhupada would be there directing the boys how to serve out. Now this is many, in the very, very beginning. So Mahaprabhu was sitting there, and he was just so happy to be in Prabhupada's association. It was so nice to sit with Prabhupada. And gradually everybody drifted out of the room, and mostly they were all hippies, so they would just take their plate, not even, what to speak of wash their plate, they wouldn't even wash their hands, just throw the dirty plate in the sink and leave. So Mahaprabhu was sitting there relishing sitting with Prabhupada, and suddenly he looked around and nobody's there, just him and Prabhupada. And they looked around the room. He saw these dirty pots, he saw these dirty plates. And he thought, well, every day somehow these things get washed. And I'm not usually here. There's only one other person in this room who could be doing this. So he thought, maybe I should help. So he got up and he started washing the pots and the dirty plates in the sink. And Prabhupada looked up and smiled very broadly. Prabhupada's smile was so wonderful. And he said, I was just praying to Lord Krishna to send someone to kindly help me. I was just praying to Krishna to send someone to please kindly help me. So this was Prabhupada. These people were so uncultured, not even washing their, what does we could wash their hands, didn't even wash their plates. Prabhupada was cleaning up after them, he was cooking for them. Nobody has known the purport of that verse, Trinadapi Sunichina, Tororevi Sahishnana, Amanina Manadena, Kirtaniya Sadahari, like Srila Prabhupada. These same types of people would come to our Sunday feast nowadays. We'd sort of give them a plate and say, can you go around, sit up back or something? But Prabhupada took these people, he found a little spark, though they were completely in tamagun, ignorance. There was a little spark of, they were wondering what life was all about. And Prabhupada fanned that little spark, and he made a worldwide movement with these people. This was Prabhupada. So we're sitting here in Prabhupada's room, where he used to receive his visitors, in Prabhupada's house in Vrindavan temple. And sitting here with Prabhupada reminds me of my second initiation. Because I was after Boulder, then I was sent to Dallas, Texas to open up the temple in Dallas. And then they sent me to help out in Houston. So meanwhile I was in Dallas, I got married to a Kuti Devidasi, and we both went to Houston. So at that time Prabhupada was traveling from one place to another in India, and Akuti still hadn't been first initiated because the letters were coming, don't send your beads, Prabhupada just now coming. And every time it's just now coming, but he was getting another preaching opportunity for a long time. She didn't get initiated, way more than the 6 months mandatory. And I was way over time for my Brahmin initiation. So anyway, we drove out to LA, and then there was some discussion that some people had been waiting a long time for first initiation, so the discussion was whether they should get first and second together. So Prabhupada called them all up, including my wife, because the talk was that I was getting second initiation, and it had been a long time. So Prabhupada asked the first devotee, who is Krishna? He said, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, you can take Brahman initiation. Then he asked somebody else, who's Lord Chaitanya? He said, he's the most munificent avatar. And Prabhupada said, no, he's Krishna himself. You can also take first initiation. Then he asked some other questions, I don't know, very simple questions. So then Prabhupada said to my wife that the wife follows the husband, so you can take Brahman initiation. So then there was a ceremony in the temple room, and afterwards we were supposed to sit downstairs. And at that time it was a lecture room. There was pews and everything. We would sit in a pulpit where Prabhupada could sit and preach. And now the temple room is there. So we were supposed to sit downstairs, and there was a door that went upstairs to Prabhupada's room. And suddenly Nanda Kumar came down. He said, Prabhupada has to do some urgent business. He has to go somewhere. So you come back at noon. So we came back at noon, and then he announced that Prabhupada's still busy. You come later at 5 o'clock. And I explained that our ride back to Texas was leaving at 3 o'clock, so we have to do it now. So he went upstairs and he told Prabhupada that this is the situation. So Prabhupada said, let them come. So my wife and I, we climbed up the stairs to Prabhupada's room. We came inside, and immediately Nanda Kumar got angry. Are, I told you to come one by one. Why have you come together? And Prabhupada said, they are husband and wife. It does not matter. Then he motioned. He was sitting on a big cushion, even bigger than this, like this. And he motioned to come around the side of his desk. So we were sitting right here next to Prabhupada. And he showed us how to count on the fingers, each mantra. Then he gave us each sheets of paper, and he had us repeat the mantra after him. And then he looked at me and went like that. Then he understood that I had to take off my kurta to receive my Brahman thread. So I felt pretty stupid pulling off my kurta in front of my spiritual master. Because this is what Prabhupada had to deal with, people who didn't know anything, So we're supposed to get Brahman initiation, you're supposed to come with a bare chest so you can get the Brahman thread. So I felt like a fool pulling off my kurta in front of my spiritual master. Then, with 2 moves, bloop, bloop, he opened it up. Even today, sometimes I get it hopelessly tangled. But Prabhupada just bloop, 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 and he opened up the thread. Then he looked at me, and again, this is what Prabhupada had to deal with. I never wore a Brahman thread before, so I didn't know whether to put up this hand or whether to put up this hand. And Prabhupada just looked at me and put it like a garland. He said, you can learn from your older god brothers how to wear. Then he looked at us both and he said, now you just prosecute this Krishna consciousness very enthusiastically as husband and wife. So then we handed some dakshina to Srila Prabhupada, and I picked up my kurta and we started backing out of the room. And I remember reading in Nectar Devotion, it said that one should not fail to offer praise in front of the spiritual master. And I said, we didn't say a thing. By this time, Prabhupada was already busy on his desk doing something. And I got all the way to the door and I said, I didn't offer any praise. I didn't offer any praise. And I got all the way to the door, I didn't know what to do. So then I said, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked up with one of those smiles, like 1,000,000 suns are rising in the sky at once, and said, Hare Rama. It was so wonderful. And we exited. We had brought some of these flowers. There's a little, they grow in the shape of a ball, about this big. I can't remember the name just now, but we'd offered those to Prabhupada when we came in, and then we were backing out, and Prabhupada said, Hare Rama. So, another story from old LA temple. This is a long time before I became a devotee. There was a wonderful devotee. He and I opened the Dallas temple together. We went from LA to Dallas to open the Dallas temple, Mohanananda. So in those old days, Prabhupada used to go for his morning walk. Nobody used to go, just whoever drove him would drive Prabhupada and then walk with him, so he was all alone with Prabhupada. And they were walking on Venice Beach. And they were walking along, and the sun was coming up over the land, because we're on the west coast. So the sun was coming up over the trees on the eastern horizon. And it was bright orange. And Mohanananda, he looked like Prabhupada and the sun had both made a pact, a treaty, to bring light into the world. And suddenly they saw a group of personalities standing on the beach. And as they approached, one of them recognized Prabhupada. And he came running up and he said, Swamiji, you remember me? Ernie Kovacs, I let you be on my show. And Prabhupada said, I do not remember. He said, no, in New York. I let you be in my show in New York. Yeah, don't you remember, Swamiji? Come on, Swamiji, you got to remember. I let you be on my show. And Prabhupada looked at Mahanananda and he said, do you remember such a thing? And everybody knows, it's famous. And Mahanananda, if Prabhupada doesn't remember, I don't remember. He said, no, Prabhupada, no, Swamiji, I don't remember. He said, Prabhupada looked at me, do not remember. And it's big, he said, oh, Swamiji, I let you be on my show. His whole ego just went, Then Prabhupada, looked at him. He said, do you come here often? He said, yeah, we would like to watch the sunrise. I said, yes, I always come here to take my morning walk. Hare Krishna, and walked on, left him there with his deflated ego. So one time here in Vrindavan, our dear old Shamsundar personally told me this story. Because one of our favorite books to distribute is Krishna book. But we don't know the story or may not know the story, how that Krishna book came about. But that time, they were all the devotees were staying in London, in Tittenhurst estate of John Lennon. And they were working on fixing up the Bury Street temple to open up the temple. So one day, the manuscript for Krishna book arrived. And Prabhupada was very excited. He was looking through the manuscript and everybody was very excited. But along with the manuscript, they sent the estimate how much it was going to cost to print. And it was about $20,000. Now this is way back in the 60s, so $20,000, that's like more than $200,000 nowadays, And everybody thought, where are we going to get that type of money? And they were all discussing with Prabhupada how the different ways they could raise the money. And then Prabhupada looked at Shamsundar and he said, you can just ask your friend George Harrison to print it. And Shamsundar, but Prabhupada, you don't understand. I've never asked him for anything. He said, no, you can ask him. But Prabhupada, you don't understand. That's not my relation. I never asked him for anything. Whatever he does on his own. No, you can ask him. But Swamiji, everything he's ever done, he bought the beams for the Bury Place temple that I'm carving, the marble for the floor. Tomorrow we're going to buy the altar, the marble for the altar. That's all been done by his own. I never ask him for anything. If I ask him for something, I'm like everybody else, just after his money. And Prabhupada said, no, you can ask him. Krishna will help you. Because whenever the spiritual master gives an instruction, he gives the Shakti, the energy to carry out that instruction. So anyhow, Shamsundar couldn't convince Prabhupada that this was a bad idea. So the next day, they came with one famous sculptor from London. I've just forgotten his name. He was a sculptor laureate for the London government, the UK government. So he was promised to help pick out the marble. So all day long they were in the marble shops trying to pick out marble. Then they found the marble. They made an advance payment and made the contract and everything and made the design. So there was no time to ask George. Then they went back to George's house and they had nice vegetarian dinner. But he didn't feel any opportunity to ask the question. Then somehow they went and they sat in George Harrison's drawing room. Now this must be a British thing, because I have no idea what is a drawing room. All I know is you don't draw there. They went in George Harrison's drawing room and he realized this is it. After this everybody goes home and he hasn't asked Prabhupada. Then suddenly, bing, he got an idea. You know in politics how to make somebody the bad guy? I'm going to teach you right now. There was a lull in the conversation and he looked at George. He said, you know, George, the manuscript for Krishna book came. And George said, oh yeah? He perked up. I said, yes, and Prabhupada's very excited. I said, yes? And Prabhupada asked me to ask you, that's how you make someone else the bad guy. Prabhupada asked me to ask you if you could pay for it. And George Harrison's smile went down. He said, how much is it? About $20,000. George Harrison's face got even darker. Right at that moment, a bolt of lightning hit. It either hit directly outside the house or directly on top of the house, because the flash and the thunder were simultaneous. And the whole house was rocking. And the lights blinked out. Blink, blink, blink. And it was an old English house, so the glass was very loose, the putty was loose, so the windows were rattling and the putty like that. And the lights went out and they were in darkness, complete darkness. And Shamsundar thought, well, it seemed like an eternity the lights were out, and he was thinking, I told Prabhupada this is a bad idea. I worked so hard to make this relationship. Now this relationship is finished. And he was thinking like that. Suddenly the lights blinked on. Blink, blink, blink. And there was George Harrison with a smile from ear to ear. And he said, well, after that, how can I refuse? So that's how Krishna book came about, one of our favorite books for distributing. And whenever, we can always remember, whenever the spiritual master gives an instruction, it may seem impossible, but he gives the energy to be able to fulfill that instruction. So let's come to Vrindavan. Oh, let's see. Oh, there's a story from Santa Fe. Nobody knows this story. It's also not in... Well, few people know. Tosan Krishna was there, Govindadasi was there, and Patit Pavana may be there. But there was a temple, before the temple in Boulder opened, one devotee named Harinama, who was my first temple president, he had opened a temple in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they were way out in the wilderness, and so they kept writing to Prabhupada, you must come here, you must come here, you must come here. So finally Prabhupada wrote to him that yes, we will come. So they're very excited. And that time, the movement didn't have so much money. Now we fly around like nothing. But that time Prabhupada's itinerary was, he was going from New York to Montreal to Chicago to Santa Fe, and then on to LA. And Govindadasi was cooking for Srila Prabhupada. So they didn't have enough money for her to fly the whole way with Prabhupada, so they flew her, since Santa Fe was direct line on the way to LA, they flew her to Santa Fe. At that time, Harinama had been bit by a black widow. This is a type of spider we have in America that's black with a red hourglass on its belly. And you can't, unless you're old, very old, or extremely young child, you can't die from it, but you can get a nice bite and fever and everything. So he had this incredible fever and he was totally delirious and everything. So Govindadasi arrived in Santa Fe. And Shimili, Santa Fe is about 1 mile above sea level. So the air is very thin there. You walk a little bit and you start huffing and puffing. So Prabhupada had just had that leela of having a heart attack in New York, so she was very worried. So she went to town and she consulted several doctors, and they said, yes, people with heart condition, this altitude is very, very bad. He should immediately go to LA. He should not stay here. So he came back, and poor Harinama, he was having this fever and delirium. And she was saying, Prabhupada can't come here, he has to go directly on to LA. So Harinama, he shouldn't have listened, but he listened anyway. So then Prabhupada was coming, but there was no airport in Santa Fe. The airport was in Albuquerque, about an hour or so away. And all the temple had was a little Volkswagen Beetle, if you remember those little creatures, Volkswagen Bug. So they drove up to Albuquerque, and they waited for Prabhupada to come, and Prabhupada came, and they paid their obeisances, but Harinama couldn't bend his leg because it was all sore from this swollen. And Prabhupada saw him putting his leg in a funny way, and he said, what's the matter with your leg? And Harinama said, Prabhupada, it doesn't, or Swamiji, those days, Swamiji, it doesn't matter. but you have to immediately go to LA. And Prabhupada looked very surprised. You boys write me so many letters that I should come here. Now I come and you want to send me away? And Govinda Dasi blurted out, but Swamiji, this altitude is very bad for people with heart condition. And Prabhupada looked at them both and said, oh, you think that I am an old man? Now they were totally flustered. They didn't know what to do. They're totally flustered. So then they began to discuss what should they do. And finally, Prabhupada said, what do you think we should do? And Govinda Dasi, but Swamiji, you're the pure devotee, what do you think we should do? And Prabhupada so humbly said, that does not matter. What do you think we should do? So then they realized it was foolish. They invited Prabhupada. Prabhupada came. Now they're telling him to go away. So they decided he should come back to the temple. So now Volkswagen Bugs are very small cars. So Harinam was driving. He had Prabhupada sitting right next to him and Govinda Dasi in the back seat. Now Prabhupada's sitting right next to him, and the whole time he was thinking that when Prabhupada comes, I'm going to ask him this question, I'm going to ask him that question, I'll ask this question, and now Prabhupada's sitting right next to him. He just thought all these questions are foolish. He couldn't think of a question to ask, so he just looked at Prabhupada and he said, Swamiji, it is so nice to have your association. And Prabhupada smiled and he said, yes, and it is so nice to have your association. They drove a little longer, he couldn't think of a question. He said, Swamiji, it's so nice to have your association. And Prabhupada smiled and said, yes, and it is so nice to have your association. Like this 2 or 3 times. And Santa Fe is famous for its sunsets. So Harinama said that night, Krishna must have put on a special show for his pure devotees. He never saw sunset with so many colors like that before. Now they come back to the temple, which was a storefront, because that was a standard since 26 2nd Avenue. So now my godsister Mahamaya, she's written this book, Prabhupada is Coming, and we know how whatever takes 3 months to get done gets done in 3 days. But this time Prabhupada's not coming, so nobody's cleaned the temple, nobody's made anything ready. Prabhupada's not coming. But this was, for Prabhupada, this was like conquering a new empire. He had temples on the East Coast, he had temples on the West Coast, but there was hardly anything in between. So this was, he just came into the temple room, Lord Jagannath was there, he paid his in Jagannath, and everything. You can imagine, with Prabhupada's not coming, what the temple room looked like. And then Prabhupada went into the Brahmachari ashram. You don't want to know what Brahmachari ashrams look like when Prabhupada's not coming. And then he poked his head into the bathroom, and Harinam was running behind, but Swamiji, we didn't know you were coming, and then Prabhupada he went into the kitchen, he wanted to see, it was like he conquered a new empire. Then he went in the temple room and he sat down on a big cushion, just like a little cowherd boy, with all his little cowherd friends sitting around him in a circle. And then Prabhupada opened that famous white bag that we read about in Lilamrita. He opened it up and he took out some tin foil, and he took out some besan laddus. But this is old days. Nobody knew what a besan laddu was. And in the flight it had melted, so they weren't round like laddus, so nobody really knew what it was. And Prabhupada, just like a little cowherd boy with his friends, he began breaking off pieces of the laddu and sharing it with all the devotees. And Harinam himself, he thought it was sweet peanut butter or something. He took one, he thought it was sweet peanut butter. And they're sitting there, and a few guests had come to the temple, so there was one hippie boy sitting there. And he looked at Prabhupada and he said, Swamiji, who is Krishna? And Prabhupada very matter-of-factly, like everybody knows, you don't know, everybody knows. He said, Prabhupada just very matter-of-factly said, Krishna, he is the little cowherd boy in Vrindavan who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the little cowherd boy in Vrindavan who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This was Prabhupada's answer. Later Prabhupada told Harinama, when he understood about the bite, he said, actually, Krishna has minimized your karma. According to your past karma, you should have lost this leg completely. Now we'll come to Vrindavan, because we told some stories about our Jamuna that she told me personally. So she told me one time, we all know the Prabhupada's rooms in Radha Damodar, where he says eternally resides. But just like nowadays, we're listening to the Nectar Devotion classes of Prabhupada. So a lot of devotees had come, so downstairs was quite noisy. So Jamuna and Gurudas were living upstairs from the rooms that we know as Prabhupada's rooms. So it was arranged that they would move upstairs. So, I already told that story last time. About the monkey? Anyway, so they were moving things upstairs, and Prabhupada went upstairs while they were moving everything, and Jamuna was thinking, what is he going to do about that old lady monkey? Because there was a monkey that used to come and tear the cloth, she'd hang out on the line and steal things, and how is Swamiji going to deal with this monkey? They didn't know. So one time she brought something upstairs, and the door was open a little crack, and she heard some news. And she peeked through the crack, and that monkey had come to the window, and the monkey went brrrr, and Prabhupada went brrrr, and the monkey went brrrr, and Prabhupada went brrrr, and the monkey went brrrr, and Prabhupada brrrr, and then the monkey went away. And Jamuna came in and said, "Oh, Swamiji, what was that?" He said, "I told her not to come and bother me anymore." And Jamuna said, "We never saw that monkey again." But before Prabhupada had come, she had asked the Brishbasis, what is the best way to make rotis? You all know Braj rotis, huh? Chapatis you guys know. Huh? So the Brishbasis told her that you get this red Punjabi wheat berry. I can't remember the name she told me. But it's a red Punjabi wheat berry. You buy it the night before. In the morning you get it ground. The morning you're going to use it, you get it ground. And then you cook it with neem wood. So when Prabhupada came, she got that Punjabi wheat berry. She got it ground in the morning. And she cooked it with neem wood. And she brought one into Prabhupada. He was eating. She put a hot chapati on Prabhupada's plate. Prabhupada broke off a piece, took a bite of sabji, and he looked at her and smiled and said, "This is that Punjabi red wheat berry. You ground it this morning and you cooked it with neem wood." So, another time, we heard how Prabhupada was traveling all around India for different preaching programs. So one time in South India, they went to some place and Jamuna got this incredible fever. And she couldn't get up. And they were staying, the guy had a little guest house, and there was a huge wall between the women's quarters and the men's quarters. And Prabhupada was one flight of stairs up, was Prabhupada's room, and her room was on the other side of the wall, one flight of stairs up. In the morning, Prabhupada asked at class why Jamuna wasn't there, and they said that she's very sick. So in the daytime, Prabhupada walked all the way down 2 flights of stairs. He went next door, he climbed up 2 flights of stairs and came to Jamuna's bed. And Jamuna was completely delirious with fever. And suddenly she became aware that Prabhupada was standing over her. He put his hand on her head, felt her fever, and said, "Do not worry, you will be okay in the morning." And Prabhupada walked all the way down the stairs and all the way back up to the stairs to his room. And next morning she woke up as if she had never had a fever at all. So, then there's an interesting story. We'll go to Bombay. Because there was a very dear godbrother, only one I can say who tells stories better than me, Atma Tattva. And at that time he was in the life membership department, but he wasn't a very good life member maker. So one day he went through the phone book looking through Bengali names, trying to see maybe he could have some luck. So he saw one named Ganguly, which is famous Bengali name. So he called the guy up and told him, "I'm calling from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I'd like to meet with you." He said, "Oh, you're coming from the Hare Krishna movement? Then please come and meet me at 11 o'clock. So then he got all his books and all his life membership form and everything, all the books and everything, and packed it all up. And he went to the address and he saw office building so huge he couldn't even imagine. And he said, "Oh, this guy is never going to become a member." And he went upstairs and he had to go through so many secretaries and he'd given up completely. Finally, he realized this guy is the head of the whole institution, whatever it is, the whole business. So finally one secretary led him into a beautiful air-conditioned office, and everybody was sitting around having a meeting. And he looked up and said, "Oh, the Hare Krishna has come. We'll end the meeting here, you all can go." And then he sat down with the man, and he opened up his life membership kit, and he said, "You know that our spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, he's spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. You should be very proud. He was also Bengali, you're also Bengali. You should help us because Manusya, what is it? Bharata Bhunti Janma Hoya. You should make your life perfect." And so the man said, "How much is it?" He said, 2,222 rupees. He said, "Okay, I'll just give you a donation. You can also make me a life member." And then he signed out a check, and he said, "Actually, your preaching didn't convince me." And Amitabha said, "I didn't think so." He said, "But my father was a good friend of your Swamiji. When they were both young boys in school, they were classmates. And every day, I remember his name was Abai. He used to come, my father told me this story because I wasn't even born then, because they were just classmates. But Abai used to come on his bike on the way to school and sit with my father, and they would play chess. And Prabhupada would come with this little tiffin, and the loser had to feed the other. He said almost all the time, he told me that almost all the time Abai won. And so this was in his childhood. So later, he became a famous Sanskrit scholar. He was working for a big university in Calcutta and everything, and he saw in the paper that his friend Abai had become A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And he had come to Calcutta, and they had a center at Albert Road, and they were giving programs. So his young son, who was in high school at the time, thought, "That's interesting. My father always told me about this guy." And even as a big scholar, Sanskrit scholar, he used to say that Maharaj who made this Hare Krishna movement, he was my schoolmate. He used to brag to people. So for 3 days, Prabhupada was giving lecture in Calcutta Temple in Albert Road. So the young Ganguly used to come. But immediately, because he looked just like his father, Prabhupada recognized. He said, "You're the son of so-and-so." "Yes." He said, "You must bring your father. You must bring your father." He said, "Okay." So he told his father, "Swamiji's asking about you." He said, No, how can I go there? He's a big Maharaj now. I'm just a Grihamedi. But he'll ask me tomorrow. You just tell him that I'm sick." So the next day he went to Albert Road, and Prabhupada saw that boy again. He said, "Where's your father?" He said, "Oh, he's sick." He said, "He's sick? Then I will go there." So next day in morning walk, Prabhupada went all these strange alleys that nobody had ever seen. He had his regular walk, but he went down all these little strange alleys, and they came to this address, and Prabhupada knocked the door, and the young Ganguly opened the door, and he saw Prabhupada and all his foreign disciples were there. And some big crowd, because it was a big show with all these white sannyasis walking through the city. So Prabhupada told everyone to wait, and he went with a couple of devotees inside, and they went upstairs. And Ganguly wasn't sick, but he was very tired and broken. And Prabhupada reminded him, "Remember I told you that you will have to help me one day when I do something." He never told, the young boy said, he never told what that something was. But he said, "One day I will ask for your help." He said, "Now that time, I remember I told you have to help me. Now these boys, they learn Sanskrit. I want you to come and teach them Sanskrit. I will take you all over the world with me. You don't have to worry about anything. I will take care of everything. I will take you to America. I will take you to London. You just teach these boys." "Well, Swamiji, I'm very old now. I can't do anything. I don't have the spark." And Prabhupada said, "The same living spark in me is within you. I will take you. Don't worry. I will take you with me." And then he had told his wife to bring some things. So Prabhupada took a rasgulla and some water, and then they left. And then the young Ganguly came home from school about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he came upstairs. He gave his father some water, and he said, Swamiji came to take me and passed away. So we all thought when he said Prabhupada will come to take you, we all thought that he just wanted to take you around the world. But we really understood. Prabhupada took him. Hare Krishna. It's all right. Now we'll go to Bombay. There was we read in the Litamrit all about Prabhupada's friend P.L. Sethi. He was a contractor. He was the one when the municipality was breaking down the Bombay temple, that through his contacts, he had political contacts with, and he managed to stop it. And then he said, I'm going to rebuild this temple. And Mr. Nair said, nobody's going to build this temple. And he looked at his son, Brij Mohan, who's still alive, my dear friend in Bombay. And he said, Brij, you get your gun, and I will get my revolver, and we'll see who stops us from building this temple. So they built the temple it was over the weekend because they couldn't go to court till Monday, and by Monday the building was already back in shape. So anyway, that was P.L. Sethi. But P.L. Sethi used to come here every year, and he would tell us a story how one time he became very sick. And he doesn't say exactly, but I assume they had a pacemaker put in. Give him a pacemaker. But Giriraj Maharaj tells how they were going to some very important engagement to see a very important person. And suddenly Prabhupada asked Giriraj, why P.L. Sethi is not coming? Because whenever I'm in Bombay, he comes to see me every day. He said, oh, Prabhupada, he's very sick. He has some problem with his heart. And Prabhupada immediately said, then you cancel this engagement. We're going to see Mr. Sethi. So they canceled the engagement. They went to Sethiji's house. It's not far from Juhu. And Sethiji was very sick. And Prabhupada told him, he asked what's the matter, some problem with my heart. They gave me a machine. Without that machine, I can't live. And Prabhupada said, you take that machine and throw it out the window. He said, but Guruji, they said I won't be able to live for 5 minutes with that machine. It's I said, take that machine and throw it out the window. I will see you die. And then Sethiji threw the machine out the window, and Prabhupada began preaching all of those verses from Bhagavad Gita. Denusminyata dehe santi virani vihavitaya. All the verses from Srimad Bhagavad. He said, why are you afraid to die? You're eternal. The body will die. The soul remains eternal. Prabhupada, for 1 hour he was preaching. He said he was going to die in 5 minutes, but for almost an hour Prabhupada was preaching to him very heavily. And Sethiji becomes very emotional when he tells this story. He said, Prabhupada gave me life. Because he used to come here after Prabhupada left this world. He was still alive. And he would put on a feast every year here in Krishna Balaram Mandir and tell us, Prabhupada gave me life. So one time it was decided, since there was no place to live on the Juhu property for the devotees, and P.L. Sethi was a contractor, he said, I'll build another apartment on top of all the existing apartments for Prabhupada and all the devotees. So they immediately built a room for Prabhupada, so Prabhupada was staying there. And then he was building the other apartments. And one day, his whole suit and everything, pants, everything was covered with cement dust. And he thought, how can I go see Guruji like this? So he started toward his car. And he said, but how can I leave without taking leave of Guruji? So he went upstairs and he bowed down before Prabhupada, and Prabhupada saw cement dust all over his cloth. He said, so, you are making rooms for my devotees? I said, yes, Guruji. And he said, so I am making your room in Golok Vrindavan. You are making rooms for my devotees. I am making your room in Golok Vrindavan. And Sejiji told me, I wasn't even a devotee. I didn't follow your rules and regulations. I wasn't initiated. I was just serving the devotees of Prabhupada, those who were serving Prabhupada directly. He was making a room in Golok for me. What will happen to them? This was a wonderful story of P.L. Sethi.
And there is something that Prabhupada said, I fought with Krishna.
Oh, one time, yeah. I was in Dallas, Texas, and the slok was about how Nrsingadev told Prahlad that just to keep your word, I appeared from that pillar and everything. So, and Giriraj Maharaj was there, so he told me, yes, Prabhupada told me that one time, that time when he was talking with P.L. Sethi and made him throw away his pacemaker, he said, I had a big fight with Krishna. Krishna said, no, he has to die. He said, no, I have given my word, he won't die, so you have to keep my word now, because you cannot let your devotee's word go fail. So I won. So we'll finish with one very inspiring story. It's not in any memories, because that wonderful devotee who told me this story is no longer in this world. There was a wonderful devotee named Kartikeya. Later he became Kartikeya Maharaj. But in the very, very old days, he was Prabhupada's servant. And he personally told me this story. That one time they went to Hawaii. And that time, Govindadasi was there and everything. So one day, Govindadasi came back from the market and she had wheat germ. Now, I never met anybody from India who knew what wheat germ is, but it's not important. It's a wheat product, but it's not the suji that we make halava with. It's a very healthy product from the wheat. So Kartikeya thought, next time that Swamiji asks for halava, I will make it with the wheat germ, and Swamiji will be so pleased. So one day it rained. And whenever it rained, then Prabhupada used to like to take halava. It's full of ghee and grains, makes you nice and warm. So he told Kartikeya to make halava. So Kartikeya went in the kitchen, and he was very happily making this halava, and his whole bhava was, Swamiji will be so pleased. He's really going to like this wheat germ halava. I'll make it with the wheat germ instead of the suji, the cream of wheat. And he'll be so pleased. Then he offered the didis, he put it in a bowl, he brought it into Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada took one look and he said, what is this? And with his left hand he said, take it out. Halava means suji, cream of wheat. Take it out with left hand. So Kartikeya was a very emotional type of person. So he's very soft-hearted. So this just destroyed him. His whole bhava, Swamiji will be pleased, and Prabhupada with left hand telling him, take it out. So he was totally broken. He didn't know what to do. He went in the temple room before the picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Just like here in Prabhupada's desk, what this last picture is about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he began to pray to him that I was just trying to please your spiritual son, Swamiji, but somehow he's become upset with me. I don't know what to do, and he was crying. Suddenly he heard Prabhupada's voice, Kartikeya? Kartikeya? He ran to Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada said, bring that halava. So he brought that bowl of halava with great gusto. Prabhupada ate that halava. He said, bring some more. And then Prabhupada again ate it like that. And he said, bring some more. Prabhupada finished off the whole pot of halava. So Kartikeya told me he learned two things. One is that Prabhupada is not alone. Because who was he praying to? He was praying to the picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So behind Prabhupada there's a whole line of spiritual masters going all the way back to the lotus feet of Krishna. And second thing, he said, Prabhupada always told, grandfather is more merciful than the father. We have practical experience in our own life. My grandfather used to own what nowadays we would call a convenience store with all different items. So one side was all the chocolate. So whenever we go to Grandpa's house, myself and all my brothers and sisters, we go to the side with all the chocolates. And my father would come, who had to pay all the dentist bills. He said, no, 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 no. And Grandpa, by the backside, he would give us chocolates. So the grandfather is more merciful than the father. So sometimes you think that we're not so fortunate. We never saw Prabhupada, we never met Prabhupada, we didn't get personal association. But you're all the grand disciples of Srila Prabhupada. He will be more merciful to you than to us. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So I thank you all for joining us tonight to hear these wonderful stories of Srila Prabhupada. We can't imagine how merciful is Srila Prabhupada, and you can all feel that, and we see it practically, the young generation, so many devotees doing things, they never met Prabhupada, but doing so much service. How are they doing all this service? Only because of Prabhupada's special mercy. He'll be more merciful to us than to you than to us. Hare Krishna. We'll see you again. How many's here?
142.
142. So thank you very much. We'll meet you again tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.